What is going on, everybody? My name is Tony Gladney, and welcome to Delta Flows, Restore the Delta's podcast that examines the future of Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta as a region. The Delta is part of the largest estuary on the west coast of the Americas, and its ecosystem is of national importance. On our inaugural episode a few weeks ago, we were so fortunate to have Gary Mulcahy from the Winnemem Wintu tribe. Gary talked about the cultural significance of fisheries for California tribes and the moral and legal basis for restoring tribal water rights. Today's topic, the Delta smelt, like all fish in the region, are enmeshed in the food webs of tribes and the landscape who lived in and traveled to the Delta since time immemorial. The Delta smelt holds a significant place within the lifeways of the indigenous communities, including traditional stories, laws, kinships, and place names. And more recently, for longtime Delta fishermen, their smell of cucumber was a signal that bigger edible fish were nearby for the daily catch. Our guest today, who will help us make sense of this tiny yet iconic fish became the center of national politics, is Dr. Caleb Scoville. Caleb is an assistant professor of sociology at Tufts University, where he studies the politics of environmental knowledge and the dynamics of environmental controversies. Dr. Caleb Scoville, thank you so much for being here with us for this episode. Happy to have you.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it, Tony.
Awesome. Well, I guess we could just go ahead and just jump right in. Like, welcome to the Delta Flows. How are you doing today? What's going on?
I'm doing great. Just been really looking forward to this conversation. I'm excited to talk to you.
Awesome. Well, yeah, we're so happy to have you here. Like you said, we've been preparing for this. I know we had a couple conversations leading up to this, and because it's such a important topic and it could be like looked over because it's so small, right? But it's so huge. So I guess just to start off, if you could just help, what would be helpful for our listeners, if you could just explain how you as a sociology professor in Massachusetts, both personally and professionally, embarked on this study here of the Delta smelt.
Yeah, of course. Well, I live in Massachusetts now. I'm here in my office at Tufts University. But I grew up in California. And so I grew up actually in the North Coast in Humboldt County. And I did my dissertation, my doctoral research in sociology at the University of California, Berkeley. And my parents grew up in Sacramento. And I grew up hearing about the Delta breeze and going through many of the places that I didn't even know were the Delta when I was a kid. So while I'm not from the Delta, my roots are thoroughly in Northern California. And when I was in graduate school, I knew I was interested in the politics of nature and the environment, but I didn't really know exactly what to focus on. And this was around 2014, 2015, and California was in the throes of a deep drought, which of course it sort of still is right today, punctuated by a few wet years. And so I wanted to look into water as a potential topic of research, and I just couldn't get away from this Delta smelt. I mean, it kept coming up in the news, for a while I resisted it, but it turned out to be a really useful object, I think, for understanding, our broader relationship with nature. And it ended up being a story that I learned a few things about that I thought weren't really being represented in that media story. It's a wild journey. That was almost a decade ago, but I'm happy to sort of talk a little bit more about what I learned in the process.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And I think that's, to your point earlier, I think that's probably a lot of our listeners' perspective too, where it's like we go through a lot of these places, say these things like Delta breeze, and we don't even probably know of all the places that we're at, right? That are the Delta. And even a little bit later to your point about how you said going into your studies and just really being interested in the California waters and you being from here. So can you just share a little bit more and elaborate a little bit more on how, as a social scientist, you studied this Delta smelt and what that meant to you in that context?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of people studying the Delta smelt. That's one of the things that was really interesting to me was how much science was on it. But it's mostly natural science for a good reason, right? Because of course it's a biological species, and we can talk more about the specifics of the species. I'm not a natural scientist, although I've learned a lot about the natural science from the scientists themselves. What I'm interested in primarily, though, is our relationship to nature and how our relationship as human beings to nature kind of affects our relationships with each other. And so the delta
Mhm.
smelt for me is kind of a window into a broader set of problems with how we relate to nature, what we do with it, how we make it useful, and how we create problems and why they're so difficult to solve. So for me,
Mhm.
that's what the delta smelt turned out to be. What it actually looks like, I mean, is quite complicated, right? I mean, it involves a lot of different methods. So one of the things is just historical, trying to understand the historical origins of the problem, the controversy surrounding the delta smelt. And again, we can talk more about that. One of the early things I learned was, about the science itself. Now, the scientists studying the delta smelt, they know much more about what they do and their science than I do. But science is also it's a human institution. It's something that we do, right? And so I was interested in learning about where this whole thing started. And a big part of that was understanding how we came to even know there was such a thing as the delta smelt. And one of the things I learned was that early on, the first sort of distinction between the delta smelt and other species, right, came really out of the projects, the water projects, the water
Mhm.
infrastructure that we built. And so, to put it simply, everything we know about the delta smelt is really tied up with the transformations of the delta that people have done to meet their needs, right? And so putting in these sort of big pumps and dams and extractive water infrastructure produce the conditions for a lot of natural science. Now, of course, as you mentioned, right, the delta smelt has been a significant species for indigenous people since time immemorial. And I'm here talking specifically about the sort of objectification for Western science. And I was interested in how that science came to be, used by people to make claims on the state through the legal process, right? And then how the politics sort of flowed from
Mhm.
that. So through the process, I did historical work. I've done interviews. I've observed scientists. I've gone
Wow.
to a lot of different sites, including going to labs and facilities and things like that. And I continue to sort of follow the case. I also did a systematic media analysis, which I know we can talk about as well if you're interested.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's so much to go into, and I'm super excited to start this conversation. If it's not obvious to our listeners, we're talking about the Delta Smelt today. That's really what we're talking about. So I also want to go back because obviously being from Stockton here and growing up around the Delta, I'm not going to lie. First time I heard Delta Smelt, I was like, it does have a smell. I was like, we're going to talk about the Delta smell, but obviously learning that this is a species. So can we back it up and can you help just define for our listeners what is the Delta smelt? Just again, in terms of just the location, the rough size, the appearance, like just so we can give them kind of a visual representation of that.
Yeah. No, certainly. We're getting ahead of ourselves. So the Delta smelt, as the name suggests, right, is a species that only lives in the Delta, the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, right? And it's a little fish, as you may have heard, right? It's 2 or 3 inches, depending on the individual. It's an annual fish, so it typically only lives 1 year. It spawns and then it dies. It's kind of silvery, kind of translucent. As you mentioned, it's famously smells like cucumbers. It's a fish that was once the most abundant fish, or one of the most abundant
Wow.
fishes in the estuary, and it was everywhere.
Wow.
And you don't have to go that far back to hear about the abundance. I mean, one of the funny things about this is that now the species is considered by many scientists as essentially functionally extinct. It's hard, even though I've been studying this for so long, I've only seen the delta smelt ever in captivity. So that shows how much the delta itself has been degraded as an ecosystem over the decades. And for this reason, the delta smelt emerged as a kind of indicator species, understood as an indicator of the overall health of the estuary. Now, this is partially because it's a very sensitive species. So scientists sort of tend to think that what's good for the delta smelt or what's good for the is good for the delta, and what's good for the delta is good for the delta smelt, although of course it gets more complicated than that. But also because it became listed under the United States and California Endangered Species Acts. And those laws, written as they are, really focused attention on particular species that are listed, that is, that are given legal protection. You can think of it almost like being given legal rights as a species. So the delta smelt, because it only lives in the delta, means that it basically only lives in the center of California's water distribution system, which is where California's great rivers meet. and mix with more saline water from the San Francisco Bay.
Yeah.
And there's, of course, these giant pumps, right, that take water from the delta and irrigate millions of acres of farmland, and also feed into the sort of drinking water for places like Los Angeles and the Silicon Valley. And so the delta smelt is important, of course, for ecological reasons, right? For all the reasons we've already mentioned. But also it became sort of very controversial initially because it was listed under the Endangered Species Act, and it only lives in close proximity to the pumps, right, that send all the water down to these places that people rely on to do things like farm, and drink water. Now, primarily it's about farming and agriculture, because about 80% of the water that people use in California is agricultural. But it's, those are all the reasons why I think the Delta Smelt has received so much attention initially, although of course the politics get more complicated than a simple water story.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Caleb Scoville. We're going to take a break now in our conversation with our special guest here for some public service announcements with Restore the Delta's Mackenzie Owens.
Hi everyone, I'm Mackenzie Owens with Restore the Delta. I'll be providing public service announcements for today's episode. During our last episode, our executive director, Barbara Barragan-Perea, shared a list of updates about the Delta Conveyance Project. Today, I want to add that the Administrative Hearing Officer for the State Water Resources Control Board has issued notice for a pre-hearing conference on October 17th, 2024. Parties which have filed protests against the Department of Water Resources opposing the permit, which includes Restore the Delta and our partners, will be present. We will keep you posted on those updates as they come. In addition, I also want to shed light on our carbon and energy program. This program evaluates emerging climate technology industries in the Delta, with a focus on environmental and economic risks, public health impacts, and community benefits. Our team collaborates with carbon removal and energy industries, government agencies, national labs, and community-based organizations to develop research and policy solutions grounded in environmental justice. We want to encourage you to visit our website and review comment letters we have submitted surrounding not only carbon capture, carbon sequestration, but also hydrogen energy projects and more in the Delta. And Davis Harper and Esther Mburu from our carbon team will be on a future episode. Coming up in October, Restore the Delta will be tabling at multiple events. This includes the 4th annual San Joaquin County Tractor Fest on Saturday, October 12th from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the San Joaquin County Historical Museum in Mickey Grove Park. So, be able to experience hands-on activities for all ages, open museum exhibits, and a tractor show, and of course, a tractor parade. Get a chance to learn more in depth about our sustainable agricultural program as well. Also, on the same day, we'll be in attendance at Edible Schoolyard's Fall Festival. This event is from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. at 466 South Ventura Avenue in Stockton. This festival offers produce giveaways, cooking demonstrations, and more, all geared towards a family-friendly fun time. And of course, for October, you're ready to get spooky? Join us at San Joaquin County's Trunk or Treat by the Water at the Stockton Sailing Club from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. on October 26th. Trick or treat to your heart's content. Bring your best costume and learn more about the Delta from our team while enjoying your time by the water with your loved ones. And of course, a peek into the following month, we also want to encourage all of our listeners to attend the upcoming Sandhill Crane Festival on November 2nd and 3rd in Lodi. This is one of our favorite festivals. Bring your kids or grandkids for all the exhibits, art activities, wildlife shows, and register to take a guided bus tour to see the magnificent greater sandhill cranes, the most magnificent birds that winter in the Delta. Tony, I'm ready to turn the podcast back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mackenzie, for that announcement. Before we continue our discussion with Dr. Caleb Scoville here, guys, we're going to turn it over to Miniya Joy and some youth advocates from With Our Words who have also been reflecting, and they have their own set of thoughts about this Delta Smelt controversy, and they have a conversation to share here with us.
hello. Welcome back to another episode of Delta Flows. My name is Miniya Joy, one of WeFlow Radio's correspondents, and I am here with Giovonni Tilley, another one of WeFlow Radio's correspondents. And this is our Black
and green
job. Thanks, Trump. No, I'm just kidding. Anyways, today we are here and we're deciding to talk about the Delta Smelt. So, Gio, what have we learned about the Delta Smelt so far?
The Delta Smelt has been at the center of controversy in California and the Central Valley for the last 3 election cycles.
From what we've documented, because apparently it's been going on longer than that, but I think the earliest back to it, we were probably, in elementary school?
Yeah, 2009.
Yeah, that's wild. Were you in elementary school at that time?
I was like 6 years old.
I think I was either 8 or turning 9, so this has really been going on over our heads, and we're just now coming into yet another iteration of this.
Mm-hmm. It's an endangered fish, and about the size of your index finger. Its dwindling population has both conservationists and farmers riled up because of the amount of controversy behind it.
And just to clarify, this fish has been documented to only be about 3 inches long. So, in case anybody wants to understand, here are some other things that are 3 inches long. Exactly 3 U.S. quarters. Your index finger.
Half a U.S. dollar.
A paper clip.
4
nails.
AA batteries.
Nails. Not nails, but
Nails.
Nails. In case you need to understand just how small this fish is. But for a fish that is that small, there is a hell of a lot of controversy surrounding it. You know, it's funny. I've heard of scapegoats, but I don't think I've ever heard of scapefish.
Ever. Today's guest has gone into a lot of what has caused this issue, but we personally have decided to ask our audience, the youth, their opinion on what's been going on.
Absolutely. So what we decided to do is we turned to one of our other WFR correspondents, Aspen Tankersley, and we decided to tell them to hit the ground running with a survey of students involved in an environmental after-school club where they asked the following questions. Does saving an endangered species matter to youth in San Joaquin County? Have you heard about the environmental controversy over the Delta Smelt and its habitat? Do you think the narratives about the Delta Smelt are constructive or destructive? And would you want to know more information? The initial response has been the following. In response to question 1, does saving an endangered species matter to youth in San Joaquin County? The answer was yes. In response to question 2, have you heard about the environmental controversy over the Delta Smelt and its habitat? The answer was yes. In response to question 3, do you think the narratives about the Delta Smelt are constructive or destructive? They said both, but it depends on the article and how you decide to view it, which I suppose is to be expected.
Fair.
It's fair. And in response to the last question, do you want more information? They said yes. So honestly, from this, what I'm gathering is it's not that we don't care, it's just that we want to know more. Because when you think about the environment, it's all around us everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when we think about environment, we think about our home environment, our school environment. We don't always think about the literal environment, you know, water, earth, fire, air. Long ago, the 4 nations. I'm just kidding.
Mm-hmm. And issues like these are really difficult to pinpoint because they're not as tangible as other issues. Something like social justice. We can see the immediate effects of that.
Right.
Because,
or school board policies.
Yes. Because you see them, and you see them actively being implemented. However, when it comes to something like the environment, and especially conservation, the effects take much longer to happen, meaning you don't see them as immediately.
Right. Or it's something that's been happening, like this Delta Smelt issue. Like we said, this has been happening since the early 2000s. We were kids when this was happening. I was over here learning basic multiplication and division. Meanwhile, there's a bunch of people arguing over a little ass fish.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just now in our adult years figuring out, oh, this has been going on for a minute.
Yes.
So again, I think people want to know more information, specifically youth and young adults, because again, I think it's going to affect everybody, but if we're looking at the generations, it's going to affect us, and then it's going to affect the generation coming after us. What's the generation coming after us now? It's Alpha, right?
Alpha.
Like we went through the alphabet, and now are we doing Greek alphabet now?
I think.
What's the next generation gonna be?
Sigma.
Oh no! Oh, that's terrible. Okay. So we are going to keep this survey that Aspen put out open for the next month, just so we can get more people responding to it, because we want to know what other people are saying. We want some other opinions. And we are hoping to get a report of more responses by the time the next episode rolls around.
Yes.
Do you have any closing thoughts on the matter?
It's a tiny fish.
Yeah.
It's like this big.
It's this big.
Yeah, somehow we've been arguing about this same fish for almost, how many years has it been?
Okay, if we're gonna start from the earliest, and I'll say it loosely, like 2009. So now we have to go 24 minus 9. And I'm gonna pull out a calculator because
Girl.
I'm gonna make sure, I'm double checking my math. I don't want to say wrong numbers.
All right.
15 years. That's wild.
Yeah, that's a large chunk of my life.
That's a large chunk of mine because I'm 24 now. Here's a question. Do you think that this is going to come up in the next election cycle?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially if they're going to try to gain California voter votes. You have to speak on this, especially for the Central Valley, because this is a large issue for them.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it really affects the Central Valley because don't we produce like majority of California's food anyways because of all the farmland?
We do.
This is really going to affect California. I'm curious to see how this is going to manifest in the next election cycle.
As am I.
I hope that we leave the fish alone. I hope we let the smelt in peace.
Please.
But I don't think it's going to happen. I think that's our time.
I think that's it.
Well, my name is Miniya Joy.
My name is Giovonni Tilley.
And this has been our segment of the Delta Flows podcast. All right, back to you, Tony.
Welcome back, everybody, and thank you so much to Miniya Joy and Giovonni for that take on the Delta Smelt controversy. I really enjoyed that segment, and also just your guys' banter and just the way that we all perceive information differently and how we connect the dots. So thank you guys so much. I think it's so important that we continue to include youth voice into these narratives and we have these conversations. So welcome back, Dr. Caleb Scoville. We were talking about, you were helping us define what this Delta Smelt is, right? And now I just want to get into, because we've been talking about controversies. That word is coming up a lot. So if you could just tell me, I know there's a few different factors, but explain, why is the Delta Smelt considered controversial?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Well, the origin of all this is, summarized in what is often referred to as California's water wars, right? And the simple of it is that there's been for a long time struggles over who gets water, right, in the state. Now, of course, that's simplifying, but the Delta, of course, is the center of California's water distribution system. And since the mid-20th century, a large portion of the Central Valley and cities in Southern California and up the coast have relied on a large amount of water being extracted from the Delta. And so when the Delta Smelt became listed under the Endangered Species Act, that gave it a kind of protection that it didn't have before. And so occasionally there are moments when water deliveries get interrupted because of the protections of the Delta Smelt. Now, often this is actually quite minor, or it regulates how much water can be taken and when. But in the mid sort of 2000s, around 2007 and 2008, this sort of really erupted as a major source of conflict over a court case and a decision made by Oliver Wanger, who was a judge. So that sort of brought this to the attention of the national media, and that's really when the controversy took on a life of its own. So again, it has origins in the distribution of water of California, between the north and the south, between the environment and agriculture. But I show actually that the controversy became something a bit different in the national media after the fact.
Yeah, and can you take us through that a little bit, actually? Because you mentioned national politics, and obviously the Delta is here, right, in California. So what did that look like on a national scale of politics, and was it still in the context of water politics? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah, I mean, so I can talk to you a little bit about how I did this, like as a social scientist, because it's one thing to read the news and to think that this is like reflecting just like a concrete water struggle on the ground, and it's another thing to look at how the controversy relates to how water actually flows in and out of the delta. And so I wanted to do that, and so this is something that was really useful to be able to rely on the work that natural scientists have done. So I drew on a study by my natural science colleagues, Greg Reese, John Rosenfield, and Jeanette Howard. And basically what they did is they figured out how much water was going in and out of the delta over time, and what were the different constraints on water being exported from the delta to for agricultural uses or to cities. And what they found is that the delta smelt does often regulate the amount of water that's can be taken out, but it's pretty small amount. So it's like 1% of the sort of unimpaired outflow over time. But this varies a lot. So I was able to take their data and then show how it correlates or not with the amount of attention that the delta smelt gets in the media and from politicians and from ordinary people when they say like search for the delta smelt on Google. And what I found is that there's variation in both of these things, right? People looking at care about the delta smelt 1 minute, maybe they don't the next, but there's no relationship between how much water is not sent to agriculture or cities because of the protections of the delta smelt and how much attention it gets from ordinary people and elites. So that was a hint that there was something going on. It wasn't just about how much water, saving the delta smelt or protecting the delta smelt accounts for. The controversy seems to kind of follow something else. I've noticed another thing when I was doing this analysis is that when people wrote opinion articles that were negative about the delta smelt, when they were complaining about the delta smelt or saying it was bad to protect the delta smelt, those opinions were often and actually disproportionately published outside of California and to audiences that were outside of California. So, people would be writing into their local newspaper in Florida complaining about the delta smelt. There were a lot of national publications about the delta smelt and so on. And when I looked closer, I systematically analyzed how people talked about the delta smelt. And I found that in the more negative opinions about the delta smelt, people often weren't even really talking about California water for the most part. They were talking often about California water, but in relation to a bunch of other grievances that they had. And these were often partisan topics. So instead of just saying, we need to support the farmers and give them more water and the delta smelt's a problem, they would say things like, liberals in California are keeping the farmers from farming, and also liberals want to legalize abortion, and that's bad. So the delta smelt was getting strung together with a bunch of different partisan issues. And that was really interesting to me. So I dug deeper and I kind of looked at how that emerged over time.
Yeah, that is very interesting, I think. And I think that for some of us, it may be obvious why, but if you could just help us also understand if there was any political gains, or what were the gains? Like, what is the purpose of people spinning that narrative in a political context that way or in a partisan way? Why was it spun in that context, or how did it manage to get that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there are a lot of folks who have material reasons for being against the protection of the delta smelt and might think that their interests are served by that. Say, like, if you're a farmer and you want more water, you might think that reducing environmental protections would do that. But that's not really what was driving a lot of the controversy a lot of the time. Really, it was about sort of media, people in the media and politicians driving attention to this issue for their own sort of political or potentially sort of not simply economic gain, but the sort of the ability to sort of divide people and to drive a narrative. So, for example, and this is an important example, is Sean Hannity. So Sean Hannity is a Fox News commentator. He has a very popular show. And in 2009, he dedicated an entire episode to the delta smelt, right? Now, at the time, the delta smelt was virtually unknown across America, even though it was an issue in California water politics for some time. But he saw an opportunity to tell a kind of story to people that would get them fired up. And his story was essentially that, as I kind of invoked earlier, right? liberals in California and in cities far away, environmentalists, they don't care about people like you and people like the farmers. They care more about this little fish, right? And it, it's a powerful narrative, right? It's used to sort of juxtapose people who are seen to be indifferent, maybe hypocritical, maybe elitist, from ordinary sort of hardworking Americans, right? And so and that, I think, articulates a broader divide than simply California water politics, right? It's a story that I think is meaningful to people. Now, who benefits from that story? Well, I think people like Sean Hannity benefit from that story, and also politicians that tell this story over and over again. They scapegoat, right, environmentalists or a fish to get reelected, but the story doesn't really reflect reality, and it doesn't really help solve any of the problems that they are pointing to, right? So I really don't think it helps the people that they are trying to get all riled up, right? And I think it's mostly a self-serving sort of narrative for partisan elites.
Wow, awesome. Thank you for really breaking that down and just going into that, providing some additional context to that for our listeners, but also, again, how the Delta Smelt became controversial into what that story is today. And it's crazy to hear, again, the timeline of that, how long this has been going on. So, and I understand that your research shows that there were media pieces attacking the Delta Smelt during normal water years in California, rather than the drought years, right? And that this narrative aided in conservative forces nationally. But didn't it also help conservative farmers south of the Delta who want more water in all years? They were interviewed by Fox News and had a full segment on 60 Minutes, and many support former President Trump in the current election.
I know. I think it's a great question, and I think we shouldn't get too carried away with the analysis of the controversy. I mean, we should remember that there still is a water story here. I mean, my simple point is that the controversy, got disconnected from the water story. And I think there are a lot of people, who do want to sort of get rid of any restrictions on extracting water from the Delta, and who would even like to see more broadly, things like the Endangered Species Act and other laws repealed. Trump, installed a former big ag lobbyist to sort of run the show when he was in office. So we shouldn't overstate things. But the thing is anyone who looks at this and understands it well, including people who work in the agricultural industry, know that the Delta Smelt isn't really what is the main cause of declining water availability in the valley. And so when Trump says like, oh, I'll get rid of this and I'll get rid of the Delta Smelt protections and then we'll just have all the water we want, it's a promise he can't keep. So I don't actually think it helps the agricultural community as much as they want to say it does. And the bigger issues, right, are just that, there's a broad sort of over allocation of water, meaning that there's more water rights than there is water in the system. You can only take out so much water of the Delta and you end up sucking up salt. And also climate change, which is changing, where and when and how much water is available. And the system is just not meant to handle the world that we've inherited. And so these are big challenges. And the Delta Smelt controversy, as it is often deployed, actually distracts people from finding solutions to those challenges. So in the long run, in the bigger sense, I don't think this really works to really anyone's advantage, except for maybe the people who want to divide people for their own short-term gain.
I think that's a great segue because you mentioned how really it just distracts us from finding solutions to this, right? So really, as we go into this final segment, right, and going into wrapping up this great conversation that we're having, I think we talked a lot about the historical context of the Delta Smelt and what is being talked about and what is being said, but is there a story that should be told about the Delta Smelt? What is that story moving forward? And is there a path forward for protecting Delta fish species?
Yeah, I mean, I as someone who's not a biologist or an ecologist, I have to sort of defer to my colleagues in the natural sciences for exactly what should be done from a policy perspective, and I think that's for the people of the Delta and for the people of California to decide. But I do think when it comes to sort of responding to these kinds of controversies and how to sort of react, I think it's really important that we don't take the bait, sort of to use often referred to
Pun
as
intended.
a bait fish, right? Pun intended. So, first of all, don't accept the divisions that are fed to us, right? The point of the Delta Smelt controversy when it's used by national media is to divide us into people who are for the environment and people who are for farmers. And that division isn't really helpful, okay? We also shouldn't accept the whole north-south divide just based on how the Delta Smelt controversy divides it, or even the Democrat-Republican divide, right? I think if you really want to advocate for sort of the sustainability and the sort of the well-being of the Delta, instead of sort of just responding on their terms, focus on shared values, right? Things that a lot of people care about, and lived experiences. And I think what this can look like is essentially linking human health, right, to ecosystem health, right? So there's a reason why the people who want to divide us want to talk about the Delta Smelt all the time, but they don't talk about harmful algal blooms, which is something that I know Restore the Delta is working on, right? And you can link, the decline of sort of drinking water to the decline of species, right? And place those all in a context together, and show that what's really good for the Delta is good for us people. And so I think that is a way forward. It doesn't mean not talking about fish or ecosystems, but it means really linking it to the things that people already do care about. And I think if you do that, you can really displace a lot of this divisive rhetoric that is fed to us by people who really don't have our best interests at heart.
Wow. No, thank you so much for really just highlighting that and bringing that up really for this story, and really how we should take a path forward, right? Like you said, don't take the bait, and really just being able to really highlighting what the Delta always talks about. And one of the things that they always repeat here is that so much of environmental health is community health, right? And how these things do go hand in hand, and how, like you said, we should not really subscribe to this divide that's happening. So before we close, Caleb, again, thank you so much for being here. Can you tell us a bit about just your published work and your upcoming book that you have?
Yeah, thanks so much. No, it's been really great to be on here in conversation with you and your colleagues. I mean, I'm writing a book right now on the case of the Delta Smelt. It's a long historical take that goes into the whole story, going back even further. I know 2009 was mentioned, but really it goes back, over 100 years, right? And even further if we look at sort of indigenous relations to water and land. And so I'm looking to try to really take into account as many perspectives as I can and tell that story. And it'll include a lot of what we talked about, but that won't be out for a little while. So in the meantime, there's going to be a couple pieces that are going to be shared, I think, with this podcast that are sort of written for a broad audience that can tell you a little bit about the controversy and my analysis of that controversy, if that piqued your interest. And then there's some more scholarly materials that'll be available on my website, calebscoville.com. Or you can, just Google Caleb Scoville Delta Smelt. You can find some stuff. And if you're interested, just reach out. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. I'm on X/Twitter, and you can find me in other venues as well. Really interested in sharing my perspective and hearing yours. If anyone has any questions or comments or critiques.
Awesome. As mentioned, for our viewers and listeners, you can find any of those reference articles that Dr. Scoville is talking about in Dr. Scoville's bio, and links to a number of the discussed Fox News clips in the link for this podcast. Also, be sure to visit his website. It's calebscoville.com as well. Dr. Caleb Scoville, thank you so much for joining us today. Also, thank you to With Our Words as well for joining us and to have a great conversation around such a topic that may be overlooked so often. So again, thank you so much for joining us. You guys join us here in a few weeks for our next podcast, a conversation with Scott Artis from the Golden State Salmon Association to discuss commercial salmon fishing closures. My name is Tony. I have the pleasure of being your host here for Delta Flows podcast. Thank you all so much for tuning in this week.